All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Keely Hansen with SVA Consulting, and joining me today is Austin and Julia from our team. So really, today's webinar is going to be all around the security components within Acumatica. So we'll take a look at various security components within Acumatica, anywhere from kind of general security settings to user security within the system, as well as more advanced security with things like restriction groups, as well as audit trails. We'll kind of cover all of those components today. So before we get in, if you're returning to these webinars, welcome back. If you're new, welcome. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and we'll go through today's presentation. As we do so, please feel free to ask any questions that pop up. So feel free to use the chat function. You can ask those questions as they come up. If it makes sense to kind of pause as we're going through the process and answer those, then we will. Otherwise, we'll have kind of a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So Austin will help kind of monitor those questions as they come through. But again, feel free to drop those in the chat if you have anything. Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So just a look at today's agenda. We'll start just in a few slides looking at some of the system security and controls within Acumatica that we'll plan to cover today. When we think about security, what are those aspects that typically pop into our mind within Acumatica, and what do those look like? Then we'll go into a live demo and feature some of those components. So we'll take a look at, again, some of the system-wide security features, typically something that you guys have set up within the system, typically a very initial component, but we'll just kind of recap what those look like within Acumatica. Then we'll get into more of the user or role level security. So again, likely a function that you guys are leveraging today, but when it comes to, how can we adjust these types of roles? How could we create new ones? Those are different types of things that we'll take a look at as we go through today's demo as well. Then we'll get into row level security. So not to be confused with role level. We'll highlight some of the differences there, but that's really a concept that we have in Acumatica called restriction groups. So the ability to kind of restrict even further beyond kind of the role level or user level security. And then lastly, we'll take a look at the audit trails, so the audit functionality, how we'd start to configure that, turn that on, and then what the results of those would look like as well. All right, so getting right into kind of the basics here. The first concept that we'll start to see as we go through the process is related to role level security. So think we'll have different native security roles within Acumatica. So Acumatica comes with multiple different security roles specific to the functions within the system. So we'll take a look at what those kind of out of the box user roles are. And then we'll also take a look at how we would start to, modify those if needed, or create a new one if needed as well. So really the purpose of these is it's really just controlling what a user who's signed into Acumatica has access to based on the role or roles that they're assigned within the system. And what it's going to do, we'll see this kind of in the next slide here, is we can restrict based on, the particular module. So think, accounts payable, for example, pages within there, so various reports, various transactions, profiles, for example, and then within, for example, a profile, what fields that they could have access to. So we'll break this down a little bit further, but kind of the three core components that we'll start to restrict or give access to within the role level security are those modules, the pages, and the fields. And really the goal here is it's ensuring that only users are seeing only the information that's relevant to them and their responsibilities. So they're not necessarily seeing components within the system that they shouldn't. Helps kind of with the segregation of duties in Acumatica as well. So those are some components that we'll look at. On the right-hand side, you'll start to see just a bit of a diagram. It looks a little bit overwhelming when we see it, but essentially what this is showing is it's going to show, based off of a particular role that you'll see on that left-hand side. So think, a budgeting role, for example, what will they start to have access to? So you'll see someone like a power user who has more access is going to have access to a lot more of the components or the activities on the right-hand side. As opposed to, if you're just doing bank rec, maybe you only have access to, reconcile those bank statements, for example. So a couple of high-level examples over there. Again, we'll see this in action. And then when we think about the types of components that can be restricted, we mentioned the modules, the pages, and the fields themselves. So one kind of example of this would be within your Acumatica instance that you guys are well used to at this point, you'll have those different modules on the right-hand side. So at the highest level, we could say, hey, Julia should never have access to the accounts payable module. So we can restrict that and she won't see that on her menu structure as she logs in. Um, Furthermore, we could restrict it based off of a page. So maybe Julia actually should have access to the payables module, but then, she's only seeing the vendor profile. So that's kind of the second component. So some of those other menu options are kind of falling off. She doesn't have access to, release payments, for example. And then the most granular in terms of the role level will be the field. So when we're looking at vendors, for example, payment methods often comes into play. Maybe we don't want them to even view payment methods in a particular role. Maybe only one person in the organization is really managing that. So we can start to restrict on that field level as well. And then when we get to the field level, some even more granularity involved as well. So we can have anywhere from fully restricted access to fully unrestricted access. So when we look at the far left of this diagram over here, restricted is pretty intuitive what you'd expect. So it's just access revoked. You don't even have visibility into those fields within Acumatica. The next is view only. So again, similar to what it sounds like, you're just viewing those records. So you can't necessarily edit them, you can't add new ones, can't delete, but you can view those components. The middle one is kind of a middle ground here where you can obviously view them. You've gone past the view only portion, and now you're able to insert them, so add new values into those fields, perhaps edit them or delete them as well. And then lastly is kind of full unrestricted access. So you can read them, you can write, you can view, upload, delete, edit, all of those types of things. And so really we'll see kind of this level of this matrix as we go through those security roles, and they will get pretty granular. Again, a lot of these are pre-built, but if we're thinking about, hey, this pre-built role has, 99% of what we need, but we want to make a few minor, tweaks to this because we want to either allow more access to certain areas or restrict access down to certain field levels as well. This is where we'll start to see those come into play. So we'll see some of this drop down again as we're starting to modify those user security roles, but this is really kind of the foundation of the user roles within Acumatica. All right, switching a little bit to the row level. So now this is bringing in the concept of restriction groups within Acumatica. So previously we saw in the role level, is that you have restricted access to modules, screens, and fields. Now with the row level, this is really where we're going to start to either provision access or restrict access to what we refer to as kind of the master data records within Acumatica. So think things like, your GL accounts, your chart of accounts, your customers, your items, your vendors. All of those are really what we'd refer to as master data records. And so natively within Acumatica, if you have access to those components, you'll see all of those customers, for example. So if I'm Julia, she has access to customers, that customer screen. Kind of by default, she would see all of our customers. So if we think, hey, we actually just want to restrict this so that, maybe Kaylee is seeing just our US-based customers and Julia is seeing just our international customers, those types of restrictions is what we would use these restriction groups for. And we'll see kind of a diagram on the next screen, but there's kind of two main ways to set this up, really depending on the maintenance behind it, how would be kind of the easiest option for you guys. And so the first one is what we'd refer to as direct. So anyone within, assigned to this particular group, a user, for example, would have access to this list of customers. So if I have access to customer A, B, and C, I would be assigned to that group, and so would those customers that I have access to. And then the opposite of that is kind of the second type. So it's inverse, and that would mean, hey, Kaylee has access to all the customers besides these 5. So most likely we would want to use that inverse type to just restrict me from seeing those 5 customers. So again, typically what we try to do there is in terms of the type that we're setting up within a particular restriction group, it would be kind of the lowest maintenance behind it. So if I'm restricting for 5 versus allowing access to 5, that's kind of where we would differentiate between, hey, do we want to use a direct type of associating these customers with access to this user, or vice versa, of we're restricting them from being able to see these particular customers in that customer example. And again, customers is one of those components. We'll see this in other components as well, vendors, item, GL accounts, projects, for example, too. All right, so again, we'll see this come into play, but just to show you a bit of what this looks like. So in this case, if I had a restriction group set up and I was kind of provisioning access, this could say, okay, person C and D should have access to 1, 2, and 3. So in this case, let's go back there. I'm assigning them to 1, 2, and 3. And then the inverse would kind of be the flip of that. And that if we didn't want them to see the remaining fields, we could use the inverse effect of that to say, hey, I'm actually going to assign 4, 5, and 6 to that inverse group type with person C and D, and we can do it as well. So it gets a little bit confusing in terms of just looking at the diagram, but as we take a look in how this looks within Acumatica, we'll see some of these pieces come together as well. So this is often an area that our team would be kind of involved in and just helping you navigate which type would be the best method in setting these restriction groups up, and then training you guys on how best to set those up moving forward as well. All right, the next component as we start thinking about security that we'll mention in Acumatica, and again see it in the demo, is related to the audit trails. So some of you may be leveraging these today, some of you may not. But this is really where, as the name kind of suggests, this is where we're tracking, any sort of system-generated record changes that exist within Acumatica. This is where we're starting to track those. So we'll turn these on for specific components in the software. So think things of if we're changing, ACH information related to a vendor, we definitely want that audited. Any of those types of components that we really want to see that history of who's making changes and when, that's really where we'd go ahead and turn those components on. So again, we can see that in different components across the system, turn it on as needed for those particular components, and then down to those field levels. And really what this does is it's going to track who made the change. So was it Kaylee? Was it Julia? Was it Austin? What was changed? So, hey, I changed this address from what it used to be to what it is now, and then when it was changed on February 18th, for example. So it's going to track all of those components. It's going to track kind of the before and after of those as well. And then we'll see that in that audit history. So really kind of taking a deeper dive into the security component with the auditing capabilities. And then lastly, before we go ahead and go into Acumatica, another component that ties a bit into the security side is the approval maps. So we'll spend less time walking through these components today. We have some other webinars that we've gone through, pretty deep diving into the approval map functionality, but it does come into play on the security side as well. So think about certain records within the system that need to get routed for approval. So something like an AP bill, for example, a payment, a purchase order, we can turn those different types of approvals on for certain transactions. And then really what this is going to do is allow us to configure certain rules as to, okay, when should this get routed for approval and to who? So in the example we see below, we have kind of 2 different steps. So we could have it be just a basic approval, everything gets approved and Julia's the approver on it, or we could have it be a little bit more granular too, based on certain criteria directly within that transaction. So in this example below, we'll have an approval by the accountant. Everything's going through to the accountant first. But then for larger POs, so anything maybe over $50,000, for example, or $10,000, whatever criteria we want to set, then it also needs to get routed as a second step to Maxwell Baker. And really, this is just kind of going through that approval process, so we can't push a transaction along until it's been approved. Really, it reduces that financial compliance and fraud risk, also starts to enforce the segregations of duties as well. And then similar to the auditing side, natively within Acumatica from an approval perspective, everything's going to be tracked in terms of who approved it and when, and kind of the status that it's in if it hasn't yet been approved as well. So again, we'll spend some less time in there, but an important component to consider when we're thinking about security in Acumatica in general. All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and transition into our demonstration. So I'm going to hand it over to Julia, and she's going to kick us off with some of the broad security features within Acumatica as kind of a recap, and then get deeper into the user roles and permissions.
Awesome. All right. Okay, I hope you guys can see my screen okay. So first of all, I'm gonna start by walking us through some of the global security preferences in Acumatica. So as you can see, we can adjust our password settings. So I could adjust the minimum characters a password would have. So if I don't want our users to set up passwords like 123 or Acumatica, I could enhance the complexity, move it up to 10, or also add some complexity requirements. I could also enable the two-factor authentication. So every time our users log in, they would have to do the two-step authentication every time they log into Acumatica. Also, I could, for example, be more forgiving when it comes to the account lockout policy and say before an account gets locked, they would have 5 attempts instead of 3 if I would know that some people have a hard time with caps locks, for example. So important to highlight here, this is like the system-wide features. So all of these security settings are enforced consistently for all users in the system. Now we're gonna transition to user-specific settings. So if I drill down into one of my users, for example, Kaylee, I can see on the right side the security settings that I set up for her right now. I can allow her to recover her password, but I could also take that right away when I would know Kaylee has a hard time remembering her password and is like having to create a new password every single day. I could also have her password expire after a certain period of time if I wanted to, so then she would have to set up a new one if needed. The next thing we're going to do is dive deeper into the role security that Kaylee already touched on. For that, we're going to go into our role list. So for that, I can first run a summary report of all the lists. So keep in mind, Acumatica comes with a lot of out-of-the-box roles already. We can adjust them or also create new ones. But here on the summary level view, I can see all the roles that I've created in the system, the role description, and how many I have. For example, if I look at the AP clerk, I can see that there are 3 users assigned to that role at the moment. But right now I can't see who's assigned to it. So if I wanted to see who's actually assigned and who these 3 users are, I could run the detailed report here. And then I would see all the users that are assigned to a certain role. And if I scroll down here, I can see who my AP clerks are, which is Steve, Layler, and Lisa Turner at the moment. Diving a little deeper into user roles and setup, I'm going to go back into one of our specific users, and I'm going to use our AP clerk that we just talked about, Steve Church. So if I select him, I can see also, like I already did for Kaylee, can see his security settings and also all the roles that he is assigned to. Right now, he's an AP clerk, but he's also a fixed asset clerk as of now. Important to know is that the least restrictive role is always gonna be prioritized. So if there's a role that has less access to something, but he's also assigned to a role that has more access, that role will be prioritized for his access. So now if I wanted to, I could add a role for Steve Church and say he should also be our GL clerk. I would go ahead and save it. And now for our security, I could track these changes, and Acumatica does track these changes. So we could have a view set up for you guys, like an easy access to view what kind of changes are made, who made these changes, and when. So I'm gonna go into my role change inquiry. And as I can see here in real time, I can see who it was created by, when it was created, when it was last modified, which role was modified, and which user. So this is just an easy access to see the role changes that I'm doing in the system. If I want to take this one step further, I could also set up business events like email alerts to notify admins, or a specific work group to make sure they know of that change. So if I go into my business events, I'm already have that queued up for our role change alert. So if I drill down into this, I can see that I have already set this change up. So every time a role gets changed, for example, my admins will get an email that this change is happening. And it also grabs right from that screen that we just saw, the role screen inquiry, and triggers this alert. The last thing I will show you on the role level security is the access rights by role. So if I go into my access rights by role screen, I can actually see what access which roles have and adjust them here. So for example, right now I've pulled up my assistant marketing manager and I can check his access rights. So as Kaylee already mentioned in the PowerPoint, here he has no access rights to even see any of our banking information and any of our banking screens. However, since he's a marketing person, when I drill down into our marketing module, he has more access rights here. He can actually assign leads, delete them, edit them as you want to. But for example, he only has access to view the business account classes. If I wanted to change it, there are a couple ways we could go about this. So first of all, I could just edit this right here and change his access rights. Or if I want to preserve this role, and I could just copy that role, made a new role, and change maybe name and then edit it. So then I can preserve this role and assign him a new one if wanted. All right. I'll hand it back to Kaylee then for the row level security here.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. And so I'll go ahead and share out my screen. All right. Perfect. So now we'll get into that row level security that we discussed. So again, just as a reminder, this is going to start to restrict specific to certain master data records within Acumatica, what individuals have access to. So just to orient us around this a little bit, the kind of master data record that I'll work with is vendors right now. So we'll walk through an example of what that could look like. Before I do, here's going to be my vendor listing. So I have my full list of vendors available to me. So again, kind of natively in Acumatica, as we just kick things off, don't kind of configure these row level security components. Anyone in the system who has access to this vendors list would have access to all vendors. So for example, I'm seeing, Big Sky Media as one, American Medical. So these could be different vendor classes, different types of vendors. So maybe you have regulated vendors versus not. And as we kind of start, before we provision any of the row level, I'd see all of those components. So kind of the use case that we'll walk through as an example would be, from a vendor perspective, maybe there's a subset of regulated vendors that, only one or two individuals should have access to. So I want to restrict access to those regulated vendors for everyone else. So again, we're using this concept of vendors, but could very well be in the sense of, customers. We only want international customers being managed by someone, for example, all of those types of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this vendor access screen. And here we'll see the row level security module. And just to pop open what this starts to look like, here are the components within Acumatica. Again, some of those master level records that we can start to restrict using the row level security. So we'll have things like GL accounts, customers, vendors, items, warehouses, projects as well. So we'll start to see all those components that we can start to restrict access based off of. And then similar to some of those reports that Julie had shown on the user security side, we'd also have inquiries for things like restriction groups as well. So if we wanted to see, hey, what restriction groups are set up for our vendors or our items, those are different views that we could have on the right-hand side too. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into my vendor access since that's what I'm going to start to restrict a bit. And then I have this lookup into my group name. So I have, some that are set up already. So maybe, for our employees that are extended as vendors that we need to pay out or reimburse, we don't want a lot of people accessing those components or those vendors specifically. So that's kind of one I already have set up. We'll see international vendors or international customers. So there's some that I have set up already, but what I'll do is go ahead and just create a new group. So I'm going to call this regulated vendors, and this will be restricting access to regulated vendors. Again, we could have a group set up with that direct type that we saw earlier as, hey, we're going to grant access to regulated vendors. So just depending on the maintenance behind it, those are components that we could assist in helping up. So since I'm going to go ahead and restrict access, I'm going to use that inverse type. And now what I have here is just a list of all of my vendors within the system. So I could keep going. In this case, we're just going to restrict a couple. So I'll go ahead and select some that I want to go ahead and restrict here. So in this case, maybe we're restricting Alpine Energy, or Alliant Energy rather, Alpine Air, and then we can choose a couple of other ones too. I'll go ahead and save that. So now what this is going to say is anyone assigned to this particular restriction group, any user is not going to have access into, in this case, CareSource, Alliant Energy, or Alpine Air products. I could, again, go through my vendor listing, select any others that would apply here, and then just kind of go ahead and select those. We'll keep it simple. We'll just keep those three. And now I'll say who we're going to restrict. So maybe I can have access because I'm dealing with all my regulated vendors, but Brady within our organization, we definitely need to restrict him from viewing those particular vendors. So again, we could apply this to just one user. More likely we'd have kind of a group of users. So we could apply that to, maybe Maxwell Baker needs to be restricted. Same thing with Andy, whoever it is, we could just go ahead and start to save these. And now once this is saved and set up, we'll see that it's active here. So if I created this group, maybe it changed, I don't actually need to restrict this anymore. We can always just deactivate that and then it will kind of fall off, so to say, and that this won't be restricted. But in this case, again, restricting these two users in my organization from seeing these three vendors. So what I'll do now is I'm going to log in as Brady. This is also kind of just an admin function within Acumatica as being able to sign in as a user. But if you did have anyone within the organization that had that ability, this is where you'd start to see. Again, most of the time we wouldn't see this being a function that a lot of you guys are managing. But I'll go ahead and sign in as Brady. And now right away, you'll start to see he has a different type of view over here. So his dashboard view is different. That's more specific to his role in terms of what homepage he should see. Maybe he has access to a subset of branches as opposed to all of my entities. And then as we talked about on the user security side, you'll see his menus trimmed quite a bit from what I had more as an admin role versus what he has. So he's really just dealing with components on the payable side, perhaps a subset of components on the receivable side as well. But if I go into my menu, again, we'll see his menu structures trimmed quite a bit. So he's only seeing certain menu components. And then if I go into my vendor listing, here's where we'll start to see some of these restrictions as well. So we had the Alliant Energy, or Alpine, I think it was. So Alpine is the one that we had restricted there. So he's no longer having access to that particular vendor. So both in the vendor listing as well as if he were going to go ahead and create a transaction for this. And then care source was the other one there, also doesn't have access to those. So those that we restricted, you'll see are no longer available for him to view. So he still has access to all those other components or other records that he had before, but now he's not seeing kind of the Alpine Air as well as the that care source one. And same thing goes here. If he's in a transaction, let's go to perhaps an AP bill. He's trying to create an AP bill for a vendor. We're also not going to see that come up within that search functionality. So he can't, associate this vendor with anyone in the system, again, because he doesn't have access to that particular vendor within the system anymore. So we'll see if he tried to search for Alpine, we can't select that. So again, kind of a way in Acumatica to get a bit more granular with our security components. In this case, we did it on vendors, but we could do it on any of those kind of master data components. All right, I'll sign out and I'll sign back in as myself now. We'll want a little bit more access in order to do these next couple of steps. So the last one that we'll start to walk through is related to the audit trails. So if I just go quickly into, we'll go into an inquiry within Acumatica. This is going to start to be, all of my transactions. And a couple components that I want to point out is what we have available to us before we have that auditing functionality even turned on. So if I just go ahead, select some of these columns that I didn't have visible before, every transaction within Acumatica is natively going to track things like who it was created by. So in this case, Kaylee versus Julia. We do a lot of AP in this environment, you'll see. So who it was created by, the date it was created on, and then same with modification. So who last modified it versus what day was that modified on. So again, this is an example on the bills and adjustments, but any transactions within Acumatica, any of those records as well, you'll start to see who it was created by, the date it was created on, and then anything related to who last modified it. So those are just going to be native on all components of the software before we turn on the auditing. And then the auditing will kind of take it a little bit of a step further. So I'll go to my audit screen. And this is where we'll start to set up, okay, what components do we actually want to start auditing within Acumatica? So we'll pull a screen. In this case, I'm showing the vendor screen. So I want to start auditing specific components related to vendors. And then in this case, we're pulling all fields that we can then start to select on. So we'll have different tables. So are we, auditing based off of their address versus the contacts associated with those vendors. So these will start to be components that we can select. And then by the specific field within Acumatica, we can set, okay, which of these do we want audited? So maybe it doesn't really make sense to audit, something like an attribute. We don't really care if someone's changing that attribute. It's not super relevant in terms of anything that's kind of high stakes. So maybe that's something that we turn off. We don't necessarily need to audit that field. But we do probably want to audit anything related to who's that vendor billing contact, for example, or vendor payment methods. All of those types of things is where we can start to check these particular fields that we're going to go ahead and audit. And then when we think of the output of that, what that would look like is my audit history screen. So once I have that turned on, any changes that are made within those particular screens are going to be tracked on the audit history screen. So let me just remove some of these dates, move it back a bit for any changes that did happen for my user. See here. We'll push this back a little. Haven't been making too many changes. There we go. So on some of the contact records, here's where we start to see, what was done and what was kind of created and by who. So this is where, from an auditing perspective, lots of fields available to us over here, but some of the main ones is those operations. So was it created versus modified? Typically, the modified is what we'll start to look at there. What did it used to be versus what is it now? Who made that change? So this was Kaylee. And then what was the date and the particular timestamp? So at 2:37 is when I made this change to the contact record, in this case, the contact or the vendor record, but on the contact of Will Volk. And then here's where I can start to see all of those changes. And then if I go down, we can start to see kind of that full history related to any of those fields that we had adjusted in here as well. I can make that a little bit bigger. So all of those components, again, based on what we have set up here, that's where we can start to see any of those changes that happen within Acumatica. So in order to have anything show up in that audit history, we'll have to set those up and select which components, but that's then where we'll start to see the output of that as well. All right, we have a couple more minutes, so I can just briefly highlight, again, that approval side to wrap us up here. This is one that we've dived deep into a couple of times now, but just to give you guys a recap, and again, comes into play on the security side, this is where we could start to set up various approval maps within Acumatica. So I'll go back here. For example, my AP bill approval. This is one that I have set up already, but I'll go ahead and kind of create a new one too, and we'll see what different types of entities we can have approvals on. But this is where we could have one-step approval, multi-step approval, and then different logic feeding each of those steps. So here's my first rule of all bills are going to go route and get routed to Julia, whereas our larger bills are going to go to Michael Andrews. Within these, we'll have different kind of criteria as well. So this is pretty vague since all of the bills will go to Julia. But then our large bills is saying, hey, anything greater than 5,000, we're routing to Michael Andrews. But then we can also have certain types of exception rules as well. So maybe there's, a certain type of vendor that doesn't need approval, or on the flip side of that, there's certain vendors that only those vendors need approval. That's where we can kind of pull in those rules from any of those components within those documents. So think things like vendors, the AP transaction itself. So anything related to that particular entity that you're approving, as well as the related records. So a vendor is related, for example, that's where we could start to add any of those conditions related to any of the fields available to us for those approval routings. So we can get pretty granular in terms of what those rules look like. And then just to show you briefly, these are the types of transactions that we would start to approve. So do we want to approve, an AP bill? Do we want to approve something like a change order within, a project or a construction environment? Our employees submitting expense receipts or expense claims that we want to go ahead and prove? All of those types of things are available to us as well. So just to highlight that, again, not too detailed, but a lot available at our disposal on the approval side as well. All right, so with that, that's kind of a wrap on the high-level components related to the security. So went through kind of the system-wide security, the role or user-level security, those restriction groups that we saw, audit trails, and then the approval maps as well. So with that, I'll kind of transition back into our slide deck. And just have a couple of wrap-up slides here. So one, if you kind of liked what you saw today, maybe there's functions from a security standpoint that you're interested in leveraging with the organization, but aren't leveraging them yet. Please feel free to reach out to us and we can go ahead, assist you in those conversations, help set those up for you as well. You can reach out to any of the emails below, that support email. Feel free to reach out to as well, and we can go ahead and kind of route it accordingly within the organization. Then feel free to chime into our next webinar. So this will be in March. The save the date is kind of there. It will be on the 19th. So feel free to kind of be on the lookout for a sign up there. We'll get those topics headed your way as well. And then just to kind of tease, the following month, April, will be related to Acumatica's 26R1 release. So we'll always do kind of that April webinar on that initial release of Acumatica. A lot of new stuff there that we've already seen, and we're kind of gearing up to show you. So that will be an exciting one to tune into as well. And then all of our webinars are posted within our YouTube channel. So those can be found by going to SVA Consulting within YouTube and then looking at our Acumatica webinars series. And then this will be uploaded there as well following this call. So appreciate you guys all tuning in today. I don't know that we have any questions in the chat, but if we do, please feel free to kind of drop those in. But otherwise, thank you guys for joining and have a good rest of your day. All right. Thank you.